To get to Prana is quite an epic journey. For somebody coming from abroad, they would most likely fly into Delhi. From Delhi, you take another shorter flight into a very small airport called Pantnagar. From there, it's about a 5 to 6 hour drive to the first collection of guest houses that we built at Panchachuli. And then from there, you wake up the next morning and comfortably leave after breakfast. And you would take about a 4 to 5 hour drive to the end of the road. And then from there, it's quite a lovely trek up to the site, which takes about 45 minutes to an hour. The first design sort of language that we wanted to follow at Panchachuli was geared around the existing house that's there. Jamshed, actually, the client, saw it as this kind of strategic stopover on the journey from Pantnagar to Prana. We saw these beautiful agrarian stepped terraces up the hill, and we could see the mountains in the distance. And it turned out that those kates, those terraces, were also owned by the same farmer that was interested in leasing us the land and the houses. So we used the resources that were around us, that we had easy access to. We had observed in other villages on the journey up and back several times, and we had observed these beautiful thatch roofs. A lot of places use the slate roofs as well. There was enough of the material, and we knew that the craft and the skill and the knowledge was there. Obviously, we wanted to have a thoughtful and a passive, sustainable kind of footprint.
And the idea again was that the kind of language of the roof would mimic the slopes of the mountains that you see in the distance.
We had a very limited amount of stone, which is why the lower parts where the building touches the ground are in stone. First project at Leti was one that I'd worked on while I was a young architect at Studio Mumbai. Jamshed Setna, who's the founder and leader of Banyan Tours and Shakti, came to us and asked us to create a sort of collection of guest houses. Because the land was leased, it was really important that we could restore the land back to what it was before we inhabited it. So everything was dry stacked masonry, interlocking timber joinery, timber frames, the double glazing, large glass sheets came as this sort of kit of parts. And so when we were given the opportunity to look at taking that to a new place, we literally just dismantled it piece by piece in the way that it was intended and took those elements to the new site. Prana it's a small collection of guest houses that are there in the mountains at the sort of the foothills of the Himalayas. And it's really to create an environment for guests and travelers to come and experience the Indian Himalayas, all of the beauty that exists. The orientation is much more linear towards the entire range of the Himalayas. There's a very sort of straight slope that's stepped in terraces, obviously, with very subtle curves that kind of relate in different directions to each of the mountains. So we wanted to establish privacy for each of the units. We wanted to establish a kind of unique sense of identity for each one. Some face the mountains in Nepal to the east, some are faced more towards Panchachuli, and then there's Nanda Devi and Nanda Kot as you kind of sweep around. Everything you build in India, but especially in the mountains, has to be geared around the idea of seasons, in particular the monsoon. We knew in advance that March of last year would be the end of Leti, and that from April 1st we would begin literally taking it apart piece by piece. Once we were able to take Leti apart, every single stone was carried down to a truck, put on the truck, taken to the end of the road, and carried up by mules. I think one of the biggest obstacles was the kind of logistics of taking pack animals up and down a narrow trail. At one point, I think we had about 60 to 70 mules making 5 trips up and down every single day. It took about an hour and a half per round trip. And so the planning of all of that was quite intensive. As an architect, our practice believes that the greatest form of sustainability is to produce work of lasting value. And that coupled with the knowledge that the most sustainable building is one that already exists. And so in this project, while we weren't able to keep the buildings where they were because of the new conditions of that site and the fact that the lease was up, the only effort that was required to sort of obtain all of that material was literally just transporting it. We used every single stone, including the foundations at Leyte, was taken up, and that site was restored back to the farmland that it initially was. All the timber, all the glass, every piece was reused and repurposed in the new site. Managing these types of projects in remote locations had a tremendous number of challenges. Once those things were kind of resolved and all the material got to site, the challenge we faced was manpower. Pretty much everybody up there knows how to build their own home, and so to find people who had the skill and the knowledge wasn't an issue. The challenge for us was their availability, because they were all dealing with their own farms and they had their own work. We got some labor that had come from Nepal who we knew could deal with the terrain. But in certain cases, we brought highly skilled carpenters who had come from Rajasthan, some of which I had worked with before on the original project. So they were there really to know sort of how to take the old thing apart, and then knew also the quality that we wanted to establish for the new site. The copper roofs were a new addition that weren't there in the original project. That we wanted to do something that would be still lightweight, but that would have a kind of quality that would survive almost indefinitely. And we found in the south of India this group of artisans who made copper roofs for temples. The form of luxury that we were after was the idea that the luxury is the air, is the space, is the forest, it's the mountains. It's what you're there to experience. And so the notion of all of these sort of additional elements, whether they're decorative, whether they're service-oriented, you don't need a swimming pool there. You don't need kind of all of these other lavish experiences. What you want in that space is to wake up and see the sunrise on these beautiful, stunning mountain peaks that you yourself as a guest have worked so hard to get to. It's all based on that notion of, I'm in this very remote climate, in this very remote location, and I'm being cared for. I'm being cared for in a way that the service is being provided, the food is exquisite, and the shelters are there, then are meant to give those little qualities that you have that make you feel like you're cared for. A beautiful bathing experience, a comfortable bed to sleep in, a beautiful view when you wake up in the morning, a fire in the evening, all those little elements, but just the richness of the materials and the simplicity of that environment is what we were after. So in terms of the landscape, we did really want to fit into the topography that was there, and that included obviously the trees. So we're using some local species as much as possible to kind of create privacy screens between the guest units. To have kind of some local, mountain wildflowers, things like that, to kind of give it a domesticity. We really try to take inspiration for that from the local farms that you pass as you're walking up to the site, and not have it sort of overly decorative, but just kind of, again, this somewhere between kind of a bit mannered, but as naturalistic as possible. And obviously dealing with the realities of a remote location. There's not a steady supply of electricity, there is a connection. And so we've put in already 15 kVA of solar power with inverter banks and batteries. The supply of water is there again, but fairly limited. We're building a series of check dams and water retention ponds at the bottom of the site. We had to look at it holistically and to try and, save energy where we could, produce it where we could, the same with water. The advantage in that location is that while there is a heavy monsoon, you get showers at other times of the year, which allow you to kind of replenish those tanks, those reserves. And with a 7-room hotel with a maximum occupancy of 14 people plus staff, that's a fairly limited water requirement for the 6 months of the year that they're in operation. The original design for the interiors at Leyte utilized a lot of what I would call sort of British campaign furniture, things that were folding. The desk would fold up and could go away. There was a folding chair. And I think partly because we knew that this one wanted to have a little bit more permanence, we even looked at the interiors in that way, that they would be not lavish by any stretch of the imagination, but that they would be a little bit more comfortable. So, to have a comfortable desk chair to sit at while you're either writing letters or even, heaven forbid, working on a laptop. You could sit there and have a relationship to the view and to the landscape. The desk literally floats off of the supports for the glazing. The gap that's created was to allow the blinds to go through. Part of the advantage of our practice is that we are very, very detail-oriented. We're very focused on not just what the experience is, but how it functions and how it performs. And because we have a workshop as part of our studio, and then obviously our separate furniture brand Case Goods as well, we were able to detail a lot of those little moments in a way that's much more thorough. One of the young women who had recently joined us literally stitched those lamps in our studio. We didn't have to make 100 of them. We just had to make, the 2 chandeliers, and then even the standing ones in the corner were literally sewn in our studio in Mumbai. Part of the advantage of our practice being in an industrial estate is we have access to casting and welding and folding and all kinds of metal and stonework, in addition to our own workshop. The brass elements are things that came from Case Goods. We used a lot of our own light fixtures that we designed or are part of our catalog. The handles were something, those beautiful wooden handles. So that's the idea, that they come and they sort of bend this way so that you don't hurt your hand when you're opening it against the jambs. There's joy in that, and we appreciate it. Our practice is built on the idea of making. Either the act of making ourselves, like cutting and making models as us as individuals, or at the very least engaging with people who have that skill, that knowledge, that passion for doing things in a particular way. So I'm not so brash as to say that, we've created this thing where, everyone will remember it. It's more the kind of experiences that you have in those places. And what I hope that we've created is a place for those memories to flourish and for people to have a very kind of visceral experience. Again, our contribution to that is just, I hope, is just the comfort and the backdrop for those kinds of moments.